I walked into my brother's house that night without knocking. I wish I could say I was surprised by what I saw, but deep down, I already knew. The only thing I didn't know was how far I'd go to make them pay. The house was quiet, but not empty. There was a strange stillness in the air, like a silence that had been carefully arranged. The lights from the living room spilled faintly into the hallway, revealing shoes that didn't belong there. Her shoes. I stood there for a moment, staring at them. Those soft beige heels she wore when she wanted to feel beautiful. I bought them for her on our anniversary. She said they made her feel elegant. I guess they also made her feel comfortable enough to walk into my brother's bed. I didn't shout. I didn't break down. Instead, I felt something colder, like my soul detached from my body, watching myself move through a nightmare I had already dreamed before. My footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor as I made my way down the hall. The closer I got to his bedroom, the more real everything became. The smell of her perfume, the faint sound of breathing that wasn't mine, the rhythm of whispers that weren't meant for my ears. The door was slightly open. I stood there, staring through that small gap like a coward and a witness all at once. I saw her hair first, tangled against the pillow, her skin pressed against his. My brother, my blood. The man who shared my childhood, my secrets, my trust. His hand was on her back, tracing lazy circles the way I used to. I didn't even recognize the sound of her laugh. It wasn't the one she used with me. It was softer, freer. It was a sound that told me she had already left me long before this night. I wanted to storm in. I wanted to tear the room apart, to make them feel the chaos they had planted in me. But I didn't. I just watched for a few seconds longer, long enough for the image to burn itself into my mind forever. When I finally turned away, I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I walked out quietly, closing the door behind me like a guest leaving a party that had gone on too long. Outside, the night air hit my face, cold and sharp. My heart should have been breaking, but instead it was settling into something darker, a calm so dangerous it scared even me. I sat in my car, staring at their house through the windshield. I thought about every lie she had told. Every time my brother smiled at me like nothing was wrong. I replayed birthdays, dinners, family barbecues, moments where I saw them exchange small glances that I was too blind to understand. The signs were always there. I just refused to see them. When I drove home, I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the silence. I needed to feel every second of betrayal sink in. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept asking myself why. Why her? Why him? Out of everyone in the world, why did it have to be the two people I trusted most? The thought made me sick. But then another thought followed, one that made me smile for the first time that night. They chose to betray me together. That meant they could fall together. When I reached home, the house felt like a museum of lies. Her scent was still on the couch. Her glass of wine was still half full on the counter. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how many nights she had sat there pretending to love me while her heart belonged to someone else. I poured the wine out slowly, watching the red liquid swirl down the drain like blood. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the image of them replaying in my head again and again. But instead of breaking me, it began to shape something inside me, a purpose. I started to think of what justice might look like. I wasn't going to yell or beg or cry. That would make me weak, and I wasn't weak anymore. I was awake now. I was done being the fool. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and went to the window. The city was quiet, wrapped in its own secrets. Somewhere out there, they were still together, maybe asleep, maybe laughing. I wondered if they felt guilty. I doubted it. People who cheat rarely think about the pain they cause. They just think about not getting caught. But they got caught, and that was their mistake. Because once you betray someone who truly loved you, you lose control of how the story ends. I whispered her name into the night, not as a plea, but as a promise. She thought she had me figured out, the calm husband, the forgiving man. My brother thought blood would protect him from consequence. They were both wrong. By the time dawn arrived, I had already made up my mind. I wouldn't confront them right away. I wouldn't even let them know I knew. I'd let them continue their little fantasy for a while longer. Because nothing destroys a secret more beautifully than the illusion of safety. As the sun rose, I finally felt something close to peace, not because I had forgiven them, but because I now understood what had to be done. Betrayal isn't just about what someone does to you, it's about what it awakens in you. And in me, it awakened something I didn't know existed. Something cold, something patient, something ready to make them both pay. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting thin gold lines across the room. It should have felt like any other day, but the air was heavier now. Every detail of our home, the scent of her shampoo, The faint hum of the coffee maker felt staged, like props in a theater built on lies. I sat at the table, staring at her cup across from mine, still half full from the night before. My wife moved through the kitchen humming softly, pretending nothing had changed. She didn't know that I had already seen everything. She kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Her lips were warm, soft, and meaningless. I wanted to flinch, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled and told her to drive safe. Watching her walk out the door, I realized how easy it was for people to act normal while living double lives. That realization gave me something powerful: control. I decided not to confront her or my brother. Confrontation would end the story too soon. I wanted them to believe their secret was safe, that I was still blind. If they lived comfortably inside their illusion, my revenge would hit harder when the walls collapsed. For the next few weeks, I became a quiet observer of my own life. I watched her phone light up at midnight with messages she quickly swiped away. I noticed how my brother started avoiding me, inventing excuses for not meeting up like we used to. They both thought they were clever, but I saw through every gesture, every forced smile. On Sundays, my family gathered for lunch at my mother's house. The first Sunday after I found out, I made sure to sit directly across from my brother. His eyes flicked up to meet mine once, nervous, unsure why he felt uncomfortable. I raised my glass and smiled. "To family," I said. He hesitated before clinking his glass against mine. My wife smiled too, pretending nothing was wrong. That moment, their guilt was louder than words. At night, when she was asleep beside me, I planned. I'd build a timeline in my head. Every lie, every unexplained hour, every message I'd overheard. I wasn't looking for more proof. I already had enough. What I wanted was precision. Revenge isn't about rage. It's about patience, and I had plenty of that. I began to mirror their deceit. I told her I'd be staying late at work, and I did. But not for the reasons she imagined. I spent those hours gathering pieces of their secret. My brother ran a small real estate business. I had invested in it years ago, which gave me access to his financial records. I started to look closely, noticing things that didn't add up. Money withdrawn under vague invoices, transfers to accounts that didn't exist. My brother was hiding more than an affair. He was cooking his own numbers. That discovery felt like fate handing me a weapon. Meanwhile, I played the part of the loving husband. I took her out for dinner, surprised her with small gifts, listened when she talked about her day. Every gesture built her confidence that I was still the same naive man she could fool. That was the beauty of deception. You let them write their own downfall while they think they're safe. Sometimes, when she smiled across the table, I felt the faint echo of what used to be love. But it was always replaced by a sharper feeling, something almost electric. Love fades. Betrayal doesn't. It stays alive in the bones. Weeks turned into a month. My brother called one night, his voice too casual. He wanted to meet for a drink. I agreed. When we sat down at the bar, I watched him struggle to maintain eye contact. He talked about work, about our mother, about everything except her. I kept my tone friendly, even joking, making him believe that nothing had changed. Before leaving, I clapped him on the shoulder and said, "We should do this more often." He nodded, relieved. That was the moment I knew I owned him. Fear hides behind relief. At home that night, I found her texting someone in the kitchen. When I stepped in, she quickly put the phone face down. I didn't ask who it was. I just smiled and said, "You look beautiful tonight." Her guilt flickered for a second, visible only to me. It was like watching a trapped bird flutter against its cage. I spent the following week crafting the first layer of their punishment. Using the data I had from my brother's business, I prepared an anonymous report for his investors. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make them suspicious. I wanted pressure to build slowly, like heat under a lid. At the same time, I started dropping small hints to my wife, mentioning his name casually, watching her reactions. Every time I did, she shifted, blinked too fast, or changed the subject. It was almost entertaining. One evening, she came home later than usual. Her excuse was traffic. I nodded, kissed her forehead, and told her I'd reheated dinner. Inside, I marked the time, the tone of her voice, the faint perfume that wasn't hers. Every detail was a line in a book I was writing silently, a confession she didn't know she was giving. The deception became a routine for all three of us. They lied to keep their secret. I lied to keep my plan alive. It was strange, almost peaceful. We lived in parallel performances, each pretending to be someone else. But unlike them, my act had purpose. By the second month, cracks began to show. My brother looked exhausted whenever I saw him. His business partners were asking questions he couldn't answer. My wife grew distant, jumpy, checking her phone too often. They were both unraveling, and I hadn't even begun the real part of their downfall. The night before it all changed, she looked at me across the dinner table and said, You've been different lately. Quieter. I met her eyes and smiled gently. Maybe I'm just thinking about how lucky I am, I said. She blushed, confused by kindness she didn't deserve. When she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, staring at nothing, listening to the ticking clock. Revenge wasn't coming from anger anymore. It was coming from clarity. I had learned their language, the language of lies, and soon I'd make them speak it in public. The weeks I spent watching felt less like waiting and more like sharpening a blade. I practiced being kind when I wanted to scream. I practiced sleeping like nothing was wrong when my hands shook in the dark. They thought my calm was weakness. It wasn't. It was calculation. I learned to carry my anger the way surgeons carry a scalpel. Steady, deliberate, precise. My brother started making mistakes. Small ones at first. A missed payment here, a murky invoice there. But mistakes are contagious. Once you make one, the fear it breeds leads to another. He stopped returning calls from partners and began to take meetings in noisy cafes where he thought conversations would drown under clatter. He began to mutter apologies to me over messages that never explained anything. I answered with gifts and short replies, pretending friendship while letting my mind map every possible route to his undoing. My wife's cracks were different. She was a master of composure, which made the moments she slipped even more telling. I caught her once in the pantry, fingers trembling as she opened the box of chocolates I'd bought last month. She picked one out, closed the box, then set it back as if nothing had happened. The smallest actions reveal the largest secrets. She began to misplace things on purpose. A lipstick in the glove compartment, a receipt folded into a book. Things she thought were hidden breadcrumbs. They were not hidden from me. One afternoon, a neighbor dropped by with a casserole. We spoke like friends do, about weather, about small talk that sounds like caring but is really theatrical breathing. As she left, she waved and smiled at my brother's house across the cul-de-sac. Her smile was a little too wide, a little too knowing. I kept my face neutral, heartbeat steady. The neighbor's visit became data. Every friendly nod she cast my direction after that was a reminder that half the street was unwittingly playing a role in their script. The first real crack came at my brother's office. He was careless with a client he thought he had bought with charm and promises. The client called me, not by mistake, but by design. He had received an invoice with our company's name attached. My brother had used our account to move money around. I pretended astonishment. How could that happen? I asked, voice like velvet. Inside, I felt the world tilt. This was the opening. Money leaves marks. Lies leave trails. I saw my chance. I began feeding the pressure gently at first, like a hand pressing on a bruise to check whether it was tender. I requested documents I had no reason to need, citing audits and investor curiosity. My brother, thinking he could overpower me with smoother lies, sent spreadsheets with numbers that looked clean on the surface but smelled of rot when you breathed in close. I saved every file, every timestamp, every suspicious transfer. I cataloged them like a detective with time on his side. At home, I played the husband. I made coffee the way he liked. I listened to the same stories he had told me a dozen times before, and I laughed in the same places. My voice softened when she spoke about trivial things. A coworker's promotion, a friend's broken engagement, because I wanted to make kindness a weapon. Simultaneously, I watched the way she moved when she thought no one was looking, the tilt of her head when she lied, the hollow quickness of her smile. It all fell into the ledger I kept in my mind. There were nights my brother came over for bro time, the kind we used to have before the world got messy. He would sit on the couch and make jokes about old embarrassments while glancing at his phone. Once, he left it face up for a moment, the screen lighting with a notification from an account name I didn't recognize. His thumb hovered over it like a nervous animal. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. The image of him fumbling told me everything. When he left, I followed his steps out to the driveway and watched his taillights fade. I felt no triumph yet, only the cold satisfaction of a plan progressing. Pressure, when applied slowly, fractures even the hardest facades. My brother started missing payroll. His vendors called. He lied to them and then lied to me when I asked if everything was okay. Lying to the liar requires a different kind of strategy. A mirror held close enough for him to see himself. I fed his mirror with questions, feigned worry, and offered my help. He accepted it because he trusted blood. That would be his downfall. The more he slipped, the more my wife wavered. Statements she once delivered without thought were now rehearsed. She grew defensive over little things, her voice going sharp when asked simple questions. Once, I asked her where she had left the keys, and she snapped as if the question were an accusation. She apologized moments later, tears quick and easy, but I cataloged the way she bent that apology. Practiced, precise, too tidy to be real. I started to weave small traps. Casual conversations with her friends revealed details. Offhand comments she made in the kitchen became corroboration when matched with receipts and unfamiliar names in my brother's contact list. I sent anonymous notes to an address I knew she checked, things meant to unsettle but not to point directly. A florist delivered flowers with no sender. A coworker received an email tipped off to a rumor. These were not big blows. They were taps on a window pane, the kind that make you look outside to see who is watching. Their paranoia grew in ways that were delicious to watch. My brother began to accuse his own employees in private calls. He deleted messages and then claimed his phone had glitched. He paced his office at odd hours and started sleeping at the office more often. My wife began canceling plans, claiming fatigue she did not have. Once, she left the house without telling me and returned hours later, eyes red, wearing a shirt that smelled faintly of another man's cologne. She pretended she had been at a support group. The lie was thin. The truth grazed like a blade. And yet, in all these maneuvers, there was a moment I did not anticipate. Watching them crumble, I sometimes caught myself admiring how cleverly they had built their lie. There was a strange respect in recognizing the craft of betrayal. The way two people could collaborate in secret, constructing an alternate life so seamlessly that the architecture almost begged to be admired. Then the thought would pass, replaced by the old hiss of ache that reminded me why I was doing this. The night I decided to turn up the heat, I sat alone on the porch and listened to the neighborhood breathing. Cricket chitter, a distant television, a dog barking like a clock counting down. I thought about fairness, about the point where justice becomes cruelty, and about whether I was already past that line. I concluded I didn't care. Justice, in the way I wanted it, required ruin. Their ruin would teach them what living inside a lie truly cost. So I prepared. I printed documents, organized contacts, rehearsed the speech I would never give directly. The plan was no longer vague, it had teeth. I would not only expose them to each other's world, I would pull the curtain back on both worlds at once. Their lovers, their colleagues, their families, everyone would get a glimpse of the truth. I wanted not just to punish, but to dismantle the safety net they had woven together. When I turned off the porch light and went inside, the house looked different. Not because the furniture had changed, but because something in the air had a resolution that felt like armor. I poured a glass of water, held it in my hand for a long minute, and thought of my mother's face when she'd hear everything. I thought of birthdays and Christmas mornings and the small ways they had chipped away at me. They had made a choice. I was about to make mine. The mask was cracking. The pieces would fall. I only needed to make sure they cut clean. I learned early on that revenge prefers patience to passion. The first strike is rarely the most satisfying. It's the accumulation, the slow unspooling, the way pressure builds until the seams burst. By the time I moved, they were already raw and exposed. My job was only to apply the right pressure in the right place. The first tool I used was what I already had: access. Years ago, I'd signed paperwork to help my brother get the business off the ground. I trusted him then. That trust became my key. I spent nights combing through ledgers and invoices, not like a thief rifling through drawers, but like a surgeon searching for a weak organ. There were patterns that didn't belong: duplicate billing, transfers to accounts under shell names, invoices for services that never happened. He hadn't been careful. He'd been clever in the way amateurs think they are clever. Sloppiness is a gift when you know what to look for. I began by planting questions, not accusations. Questions have teeth that work slowly. I arranged a meeting with one of the investors, a stiff man who liked numbers more than people. I suggested an internal review, framed it as fiscal responsibility, concern for the company's reputation. He welcomed it because fear dressed as prudence sounds respectable. I brought charts that hinted at irregularities without shouting them. The charts did their work, they seeded doubt. At the same time, I started nudging my wife in private ways that looked like concern and looked nothing like the cry of a betrayed husband. I mentioned my brother casually in conversations, how stressed work was, how hours at the office were adding up. I asked if she'd seen him lately and let the implication hang. She answered the way someone caught in a lie, answers too quickly, too precisely. Each hurried response tightened the loop I was weaving around them. The second module of my plan was social pressure. People can defend themselves from accusations, but the court of social opinion is less forgiving. I began sending anonymous notes. Small, unnerving, enough to foster suspicion, but not enough to reveal my hand. A bouquet with no sender at her office. A voicemail that made no threat but said, "Secrets have a way of meeting daylight." I knew the kind of person she was. She would panic enough to make mistakes. My brother, who prided himself on calm, began to flutter. Work rumors are contagious. I didn't start the rumor about my wife's fidelity. I simply directed attention toward the very places rumors like to breed: late nights, unexplained appointments, a name mentioned once as if by mistake. I emailed an HR tip about a potential conflict of interest, anonymous and formal, the kind left in inboxes that are then forwarded and forwarded again. I watched as her smile dimmed in meetings, as she suddenly filled the margins of her day planner. It's remarkable how quickly confidence dissolves when the ground underneath your feet becomes uncertain. The financial angle required more craft. I couldn't expose him with a single paper and be done. He would fight, deny, flail. He had partners and pride, and a way of making numbers that looked like progress when explained with a certain rhythm. So I set a different trap: the audit. I didn't need him to admit anything to me. I needed external authorities to ask the right questions. I compiled every suspicious transfer I'd found and built a timeline, then fed it, discreetly, carefully, to an accountant I'd hired for the task. I didn't ask her to break laws or to impersonate anyone. I asked for a professional opinion that would stand up in a room full of other adults. The email arrived to his inbox like any other. Subject line innocuous, tone businesslike, requesting clarification on certain line items for regulatory review. He opened it and clicked. The counselor's voice on the phone came soon after, the kind of voice that suggests precedent and paperwork and audit trails. Those are words that make men who hide things breathe faster. By the time the auditors were circling politely, his cash flow had begun to look tenuous. Vendors called. Partners asked awkward questions. My brother started meeting with lawyers under the pretense of possible restructuring. The man who had once smiled through every crisis now walked with his shoulders squared against worry. I took small comfort in that shift. He deserved the wobble. At home, I orchestrated fractures that were more intimate. I did not need to humiliate them publicly. Humiliation would be messy and could make me look unhinged. Instead, I forced the collapse in ways that mattered: reputations, relationships, livelihoods. My wife's boss began to ask about tardiness. A client she managed was nudged by someone who had noticed irregularities in communication. The more they tangled, the more their private choices bled into public consequences. There were tactical moments of bluffing too. I pretended to be the man I'd appeared to be for so long, the forgiving husband. I hugged her in supermarkets, accepted her excuses with a slow smile, let her think she had me boxed into inertia. When she sent flirty messages, I read them and cataloged them and let them be the paper maps that would lead to her undoing. My restraint was corrosive to them. The knowledge that I knew and didn't react ate at their certainty. A particularly delicious part of their unraveling involved my brother's employees. Men who had trusted him for paychecks started asking questions. I seeded doubts gently, raising inconvenient but plausible concerns. A file that should have been where it was not was mentioned in passing. A promise that had been reiterated 3 times was now, strangely, missing documentation. Their internal confidence frayed and then hissed like tape pulled from skin. Partners who had once deferred to his charm began to check calendars and receipts. I never made direct threats. Threats give your enemy the opportunity to respond, to retaliate, to make counter-narratives that muddy rivers. Instead, I choreographed a slow cascade. Pressure from investors, curiosity from regulators, whispers in the office, a suspicious HR email, a neighbor's casual comment about seeing someone at odd hours, small pebbles making waves that grew into a tide. Humans crumble under cumulative doubt more often than sudden blows. I used that knowledge. There was a night I nearly lost my nerve. My mother called unexpectedly and asked if everything was okay. Her voice was cautious, the way it gets when she suspects something but doesn't want to ask and risk the answer. I lied like a practiced actor, voice steady, and said everything was fine. After I hung up, I sat in the dark and felt the emptiness widen. Revenge asked for a cost. Sometimes that cost was the peace of people who didn't deserve anxiety. I rationalized it quickly because I could not bear truth without consequence, because some debts require payment. The week the auditors finally requested a meeting, the house was colder than usual. My brother took to sleeping in the office. He replied to my texts with one-word answers. My wife stopped making dinner for the 2 of us and started eating earlier in the kitchen, alone. They were tired in ways that looked like guilt. Guilt is visible in the small, private habits of people who know they are fragile. When the first article hit a local business rag about irregularities in his firm, I watched my wife's face as she scrolled. There was a flash that slit of shock and then a calculation beginning. She looked at me, her eyes asking something she didn't allow her mouth to form. I pretended to be engrossed in my phone. She caught me watching and forced a smile. The performance never lasted as long as the deception had. By the time I arranged the whisper campaign that pointed a spotlight at both of them, they had no idea who had taught them to fear daylight. I had removed myself from their sightlines. I never gave a name. I let the narrative sprout wings, from investor rooms to office gossip to HR's inbox to a little headline that smelled faintly of scandal. It moved like a living thing, and the people who had built a life inside it watched it eat their foundation. I am not proud of everything I did. There were moments when my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like a stranger. I saw hunger there, an animal that had been fed pain and asked for more. But I also saw clarity. The lines that betrayed them were visible, and I used them like a map. In the end, revenge is not a single act. It is a geometry of choices. I drew my shape and watched the edges begin to come apart. The plan unfolded exactly the way it had to. Not because I was a genius, but because I waited, and because I knew where to press. When their equilibrium failed, it did so in public and private. Their trust bled into business meetings and family dinners. Their secret life became a spectacle that echoed into rooms full of people whose opinions mattered far more than mine alone. And while those pieces moved, while their world dimmed in small, precise ways, I kept my face calm and my hands steady. I had always known that the best kind of revenge is the one that leaves the avenger intact enough to walk away. My next moves would be louder, but for now, the quiet work had done its appetite building. The night I invited them both over, it felt like I was hosting a funeral for a version of myself that no longer existed. I spent the day preparing everything, not just the food or the table, but the entire moment. It had to feel normal. It had to feel like a family gathering. That was the trap. Normalcy disarms people faster than rage ever could. The invitation was simple. Sunday dinner at my place, just like old times. No one questioned it. My brother replied with a thumbs-up emoji as if nothing had changed between us. My wife asked if she should bring dessert. I told her no. Everything was already sweet enough. She didn't get the double meaning. That made me smile. I set the table just like she used to. 2 glasses at each end. Candles lit. Napkins folded in that little triangle she always insisted on. The whole house was dressed in comfort, in familiarity. Like a perfect stage set for the last act of a play neither of them knew they were in. They arrived together. That, more than anything, told me how far gone they were. She had stopped pretending. Or maybe she thought I still hadn't noticed. My brother gave me that same lopsided grin he wore when we were kids, like the world couldn't touch him. He hugged me like a man who believed he was still trusted. My wife kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. I poured wine. I asked about work, about life, about our mother. The 3 of us laughed, and I played along. I had rehearsed this part. Every laugh, every nod, every moment of casual warmth. You can't deliver revenge if your face gives it away too soon. They were both so relaxed. That was the most insulting part. They thought they had gotten away with it. My wife touched my brother's wrist once when she laughed too hard. It was quick, subtle, but I saw it. My brother avoided eye contact for a few seconds afterward. I knew that look. It was guilt, poorly hidden under a layer of habit. Dinner went smoothly. No arguments, no tension. I made sure the wine kept flowing just enough to soften them without making them suspicious. About halfway through dessert, a chocolate mousse I didn't even taste, I looked at them both and said, "Before we finish, I want to show you something." They paused. I stood up and walked to the corner cabinet where I kept my speaker system. There, already synced, was a voice recording I had saved to my phone days ago. I hit play. Her voice filled the room first, soft, breathless, whispering things no wife should ever say to anyone but her husband. Then came his voice, responding with familiarity that didn't belong to a brother-in-law. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched them both freeze. My wife's fork dropped from her hand. My brother leaned back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I stood still and let it play. The entire 2-minute clip. It didn't need to be longer. It said everything. When the audio stopped, I didn't speak. They didn't either. My wife's face went pale. She looked at me, then at him, then back at me, like trying to figure out who to beg first. My brother ran a hand down his face, but he didn't say sorry. He just exhaled, long and slow, like someone realizing the parachute wasn't going to open. "You recorded us?" she finally whispered. I nodded. "You knew?" he added, eyes desperate now. I nodded again. "For how long?" she asked, her voice trembling. I smiled. "Long enough to watch you both ruin yourselves." I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I didn't demand explanations. That would have given them the illusion that they still had power. Instead, I laid it all out, calmly, methodically. I told my brother that his financial fraud had already been reported, that the regulators had his name on a list, that his accounts were under review. I told him some of his investors had already pulled out quietly, that the whispers he'd been hearing were real, and they started with me. I turned to her and explained, without venom, that her affair was known, that I had sent the recordings, not to friends, not to family, but to the HR department at her job, to the client whose contract she had broken for a late-night rendezvous, to the friend she had lied to about working late. I didn't need to destroy her life. I just needed to tell the truth to the right people. "You're a monster," she said, voice barely audible. "No," I said. "You made me one," she cried then. Not the kind of crying that invites sympathy, the ugly kind. The kind that came from knowing the mask had been torn off and there was no one left to lie to. My brother didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, defeated, humiliated, cornered by the consequences he had helped create. When it was clear they had nothing left to say, I stood up and collected their plates. "You can go now," I said. Neither moved. I said go. They left, separately. No goodbyes, no apologies. Just shame carried out the front door in silence. I stood alone in the quiet after they were gone. The candles still flickered. The wineglasses sat half empty. The house was spotless, except for the stain of betrayal that had finally been wiped clean. I felt no joy, no thrill, just a deep, quiet satisfaction. This wasn't revenge fueled by rage. This was justice served ice cold. And the best part? They did it to themselves. After they left that night, I didn't sleep. I didn't drink, didn't pace, didn't celebrate. I just sat in the silence of my living room with the lights still low and the air still heavy, and I listened. Not to any sound in the house, but to the stillness inside me, the kind that only follows something permanent. The strange thing is, there was no rush of satisfaction. No cinematic final note where I stood in victory over the ruins I created. No applause from the universe. Just silence. Honest, raw, and endless. I had imagined this moment for months, the night they would see the truth play out in front of them. The night they would feel what I felt, the betrayal, the collapse, the knowing. And they did feel it. I saw it in their faces. But now, sitting there, all I could feel was nothing. Or maybe not nothing. Maybe just the hollow space where love used to live. I thought about what I lost. Not just a wife, not just a brother, but trust, innocence. The version of myself that used to believe loyalty was unshakable. That kind of belief, once broken, doesn't rebuild. It stays fractured, no matter how you try to glue it back together. For a few days after the confrontation, things moved fast. My brother's company began unraveling publicly. Investors started asking very loud questions. A few articles surfaced, nothing headline-grabbing yet, just enough noise to stain his name in professional circles. A lawsuit was filed. I wasn't involved directly, but I didn't need to be. I had lit the match. The fire knew what to burn. My wife, ex-wife I should say now, was called into a closed-door meeting at her firm. I wasn't there, obviously, but I imagine it didn't go well. She sent me a message afterward. Just one. I deserved that. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Eventually, I told my mother. Not the whole story, just enough. I saw her face fold inward as the pieces landed. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just looked down at her hands and whispered, "Your brother always did want what was yours." I think that broke me more than anything. I moved out of the house 2 weeks later. Not because I had to, but because the walls remembered everything. The bed, the kitchen counter, the scent of her and the bathroom steam. I left behind the furniture, the dishes, even the curtains she picked out. I didn't take revenge on objects. I took revenge on the people who gave them meaning. I started over in a smaller place on the edge of town. Simple, quiet, anonymous. No shared photos on the walls. No shared toothbrushes, just me and the echo of what I'd lived through. It wasn't until the third night there that I let myself cry. Not because I missed her, but because I missed who I was before all of this. The version of me that trusted, that smiled without checking shadows, that loved without suspicion. That version died slowly. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Every lie took a sliver of him. By the end, there wasn't much left. But in that death, I found something else. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. Betrayal teaches you something honest about people, not just the ones who hurt you, but about yourself too. It reveals what you're willing to endure and what you're capable of when you've been pushed past your breaking point. I learned that I could be cold, calculated, precise. That scared me. Still does. But I also learned that I could survive, and that part matters more. Sometimes I think about what they say to each other now. If they still talk at all, I wonder if they regret it, not just getting caught, but actually doing what they did. I'll never really know, and I don't care to. Their guilt isn't my burden to carry anymore. A friend once asked if I would ever forgive them. I said I didn't need to. Forgiveness is often confused with permission, with pretending it never happened. But I remember everything, every glance, every lie, every whisper in the dark that wasn't meant for me. I don't forgive, I don't forget, but I moved on. That's the real revenge. Not the exposure, not the collapse, not even the silence I left them with. It's the fact that I'm still here, still breathing, still building something new. And they'll always be trapped in the memory of what they destroyed. I live beyond it now. I don't look back, except to tell this story. Because some confessions don't seek forgiveness. They seek truth. And this is mine.